You should know what the area that you want to look in. So I service all of Palm Beach County, all of Broward County, and part of north part of Miami. So you want to work with a realtor that is very knowledgeable, and it's really very important to have that person by your side because, again, attorneys are not writing contracts here in Florida. We are. Now, yes, the contract is a standard bar Florida Realtor Bar Association contract, but you have to know how to fill it in to represent your party the best.
This is Dave Steinberg, and this is your Mortgages Made Easy podcast. We are sitting with an old friend, Bonnie Metviner. Bonnie is a realtor in South Florida. She specializes in the Boca del Rey area, generally speaking. And we've had conversations on and off over the years about because she's really a Long Island girl relocated.
That's right.
That's what you need to know about Bonnie. She's a Long Island girl relocated. You can take the girl out of Long Island, but you can't take Long Island out of the girl. So Bonnie and I have had conversations, and one of the things that she loves helping people from the Northeast relocate to Florida. So tell us a little bit about that, Bonnie.
So I personally relocated myself. So I am very experienced and knowledgeable what it takes to relocate yourself or relocate your family. It's a big task to uproot yourself and move to Florida. We're all the way across the 95 corridor. So why do people move to Southeast Florida? It's an easy relocation. So I love it because I've been coming to Florida my entire life. My grandmother lived in South Beach. And my father's parents built a house in Tamarack. So it was very familiar to me before I moved here myself.
How long have you lived in Florida?
21 years.
21 years.
2003.
Wow. Since you were 3 years old. Got
it. Yeah. So as this transplant, I will never claim to be a Floridian. I will always be a New Yorker. But that's one of the best things, to have a New Yorker on your side, because we know how to negotiate. So negotiating, when you're relocating, very, very important to have an experienced realtor on your side, because when you have an experienced realtor on your side, they know how to write the contract properly. Unlike realtors in New York, we write the contract here. So we write the contract. The terms and conditions have to be as good as possible to be the winning bidder.
Mm. Now, one of the things that's very different, other than the fact that generally speaking, Florida buyers are not represented by attorneys, which is different than people in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. But the other thing is the time frame. And, boy, I've been doing business in Florida for about a decade now. One of the things that always surprises my buyers is that often there's a 30-day close, especially these days. That means from the day your contract is signed until the day you close, you have 30 days. And the other thing about Florida that people don't know is that they take the 30 days seriously. Mm. I have a client right now in New York who has a May 3rd closing, and they may, if they're lucky, close by the end of June.
Yeah.
And in Florida, that would never happen. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So you're absolutely right about that. So in Florida, our contracts are not on or about, they're on. So when we write a contract here and it states we're closing on June 30th, we're closing on June 30th, or all parties have to agree to an extension. So we actually do closings anywhere from 7 days to 30 days, basically. We've had properties close, a cash buyer can close in a week, or we've had mortgage buyers close in 2 weeks. Our financing is very, very short. Some lenders, as Dave, I know you could probably do it as well. Getting the approval. If you get them qualified up front, then there's less for them to do during the process. So we can close somebody even with a mortgage within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, depending on what works. Typically, we don't look for anything longer than 30-day closings. And in order to keep those timeframes, we have all the timeframes are in our contract. It's really funny because I have a cousin moving down from Middletown, New York. And when I looked at the contract that the attorney drafted, I said, oh my God, I write better contracts. So our contracts here have all the terms and conditions in a contract, such as how much you're offering for the property, how much are you putting down in an earnest money deposit, how long or short is your inspection period, how long or short is your commitment period, and what is your closing date, not on or about.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's interesting because it really puts everyone on a tight time frame, which means you have to be prepared. What else do New York or Northeast buyers need to know about buying in South Florida?
Well, what they need to know is that they need to work with a realtor that is experienced, knowledgeable, and connected. Because when you do work with a realtor that has all these qualities, they know how to outbid the other buyers on the transaction. We're experienced with what the closed sales are. We're experienced of what's going on in that marketplace. You could just choose a realtor, but you don't want to just choose a realtor. You want somebody that's going to guide you through the process. And that's why you want an experienced, knowledgeable, connected realtor by you.
Yeah. The other thing that I find in my Florida deals, people are often shocked by some of the issues that come up. For example, the fact that South Florida is so weather dominated, right? People have to know about the condition of the home and whether the home will stand up to weather.
Mm-hmm. And
then they'll also have to be prepared for insurance. But let's talk about the home condition first.
So having a knowledgeable realtor is really important because when I have a buyer, I take the buyer from very beginning to the very end at closing and beyond. So what's important about that is I go with the buyer to the inspection. We hire a qualified inspector. We want somebody that knows the inside and the outside of the home, that's going to get on the roof, our roofs only last about 20 years down here. So you want an inspector that's going to tell you how old the roof is, what kind of condition it is, and if you're going to get insurance on it. So here in Florida, these are very, very important factors because insurance rates in Florida are extremely high. So it's going to be a culture shock from coming from New York, California, or any other state. Our insurance is the highest in the nation. And so not only do you have to have somebody that helps guide you through the process, because you're going to have a windstorm inspection, a 4-point inspection, a wind
Can you tell us about
inspection.
those a little bit more? What's a 4-point inspection?
4-point inspection is where they inspect the roof, the electrical panel, they inspect the how the roof is tied down, what kind of coverage you have for your windows, because these are the things that's going to tell the insurance company what kind of risk you're going to be to them. So what we have going on here is right now our insurance rates are very, very expensive. So we want buyers to be prepared to understand that if you have impact windows, hurricane impact windows are going to cut your costs down on your insurance. They're going to cut your costs down on your electric bill, and they're going to save you a ton of money. So if you don't have impact windows, I always suggest to buyers, think of putting them in the future because they're going to save you a tremendous amount of money. Air conditioners. We look at air conditioners. What are the age of the air conditioners? What kind of condition are they in? Are they running well? Because air conditioners, if they're brand new, again, will save you a lot of money on your electric bill. I put in 2 new air conditioners in my house and I cut my electric bill in half. So our electric bill is our biggest bill down here in Florida. And if you're able to cut that bill in half by having new electric air conditioners, impact windows and doors, new roofs, they're going to save you a tremendous amount of money on your cost of living.
Mm.
And then when you hit 95 and east of 95, when we hit the ocean or the ocean or the intercoastal, our insurance rates go even higher. So you want to make sure that you have all these qualities to a home that are going to save you on your insurance bill.
And that's where having a great realtor like you comes in, because if you're, it's not a great market to buy on your own. You know,
Yeah.
if you're, in other parts of the country, it's not that hard. You drive up to a house, you see the house, maybe you have an inspector, but you're, it's pretty straightforward. There's so much particular knowledge in South Florida, the 4-point inspection, the roof inspection, and knowing the insurance broker to bring in on the deal, because I've seen crazy differences in insurance quotes. So having somebody who has that network is just huge.
Right. And then the other thing is we have piping issues down here as well. So if you're looking at a home that was built in the 1950s or 60s, or even sometimes the 70s, you might have cast iron piping underground. And the problem with that is that it falls apart. So you want to find out is when I work with a buyer, I'm going to ask the questions of how old is the piping? Has the piping underground been inspected? Has it been replaced? Has the air conditioning been replaced? What is the age of the roof? These are things that when you work with a realtor that knows what they're doing, they're going to ask these questions. I've been out with buyers where then the listing agent doesn't even have these answers. When I go to list a property, these are the questions I ask when I'm on a listing appointment. I want to know these, so I want to be prepared that when a buyer comes in, when I'm working with a buyer or I'm working with the listing, I have the answers beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other things that we're dealing with down here that people don't understand is the condo laws that have changed down here. We have issues with our condos where all the condos are going through 40-year rejuvenations. They're going through assessments. People need to work with a realtor that knows what to ask for from the condos. Otherwise, you're going to get into a building that's going to have assessments and you're not going to know what to do after you get these $100,000 assessment bills.
Yeah, so you could look at two condos priced identically, and one could be a good deal and one could be a money pit. And it's all about the condition of the condo and the whether or not where they are in their assessments, whether they've passed or not, etc. Bonnie, one of the things that's become an issue in the real estate industry in general is this lawsuit that people have been talking about over the last several months. How does that affect your buyer? Because my understanding is that the traditional model where the listing agent negotiates the fee and that fee includes the buyer's agent as well as the listing agent, that's going to change. How do you think that's going to impact the dynamics of, if I'm buying a house and I want to work with you?
So it's not going to drastically change, and buyer's agents are still going to get paid. It depends on the listing agent of the property. So when I take a listing, I will still talk to my sellers about getting buyer agent compensation, because I want a buyer to feel like they do not have to worry about their buyer's agent getting paid. But on the other hand, not all sellers are going to understand that. So if you're dealing with that as a buyer's agent, what we have to do is be prepared. Go in, have your buyer sign a buyer broker agreement. This is going to be the law going forward. Buyers are going to have to sign buyer broker agreements. And there's nothing wrong with that, because sellers always had to sign agreements. So why is the buyer didn't have to be obligated to an agent? Now it's going to be an equal playing field where a seller has to sign a listing agreement with a listing agent, and now a buyer is going to have to sign a buyer broker agreement with the buyer's agent. And what it's going to do is it's going to obligate the buyer to the buyer's agent, and that they're going to have to, if the seller does not compensate the buyer's agent, the buyer will be compensating them. I mean, no one goes to work and doesn't want to get paid. So we take time out of our life so that we are guiding you through the process. We still have to get paid too. Now, if we have in the buyer broker agreement a certain percentage and the seller is willing to compensate us for that, we will be able to negotiate that right into our contracts so that the seller, we could try to get the money from the seller so that the buyer doesn't have to necessarily get stuck with the whole fee. It's all in the negotiating skills.
And you know what? So much of it is about being able to be confident about the value you bring. And, frankly, again, because of how complex the South Florida market is, because of the timeframes, because of the closing date being specific, because of the inspections, because of the 4 points, because of all of those things, it would be, for many people, it would be insurmountable to buy on their own.
Absolutely, because you're not going to know how to guide through the process, and you're not going to know. You go to buy a listing agent, you have no representation. You have no one guiding you through the entire process. So what you're doing is, as a listing agent, how could he represent both sides of the transaction equally? He can't. So it's always going to be somebody that he's going to be saying, okay, you can try to be fair to both parties, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you 100% can. Now, here in the state of Florida, we are transaction brokers. We are, at this moment, still allowed to do both sides of the transaction. This may change in the future with these compensation agreements. We're not sure if that's going to change, but one of the things that is going to change is that we are not going to be allowed to put compensation to the other buyer's agent in the MLS. So what's going to happen is when a buyer's agent goes to show a property, they're not going to know. Turn that down. They're not going to know what the compensation is because it's not going to be in the MLS. So what'll happen is they're going to have to call the listing agent and say, how much are you paying to the cooperating buyer's agent? And then this way they will know what they're dealing with. In these buyer broker agreements, we're not going to be allowed to get more from the buyer if the seller is compensating the buyer's agent what is in that buyer broker agreement. So it's not like we're going to get a lot of more money than we're getting now.
You're not going to double dip.
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah. Bonnie, it's really a pleasure having this conversation with you. Let's switch gears for a minute. What are you passionate about? What are you passionate about?
My passion is education. I love educating buyers, sellers, and other realtors. So if I work with a realtor on the other end that doesn't really know what they're doing, I'm happy to help them get through the process, because I want to make, to me, selling a property is a happy meeting of the minds for both parties. A buyer and seller, when they get to that closing table and they're both happy, it is a really good transaction. So and I always try to keep deals together. So to me, my passion is about education. I go on to a listing appointment. I sit there and I will educate my sellers so that they know the market, they know the buyers that are out there looking in their marketplace, and they know what to expect. I do not want anybody to say, you didn't tell me this is going to happen. I guide them through their entire process. When I work with a buyer, I'm the same way. I treat people how I want to be treated. I think it's very, very important.
One of what our viewers may not know about you, when we'll put your information down below, so we'll have your contact information and best way for people to reach you. But what people may not know about you is that you really are the pro. I know you from your days as being a CRS being the highest designation in the real estate business. not only are you a CRS, but you are an officer in the different levels, and you were regional vice president representing a lot of the Northeast, in fact. So you have that perspective. You have the national perspective because you've been on so many national teams, and then of course you've been had various offices within the Florida real estate community. So that you're one of the most respected realtors I know in South Florida. This has been so much fun. Give us 2 or 3 takeaways. If I'm buying today, if I'm going to go down to South Florida today to buy a home, what 2 or 3 things should I know?
You should know what the area that you want to look in. So I service all of Palm Beach County, all of Broward County, and part of north part of Miami. So you want to work with a realtor that is very knowledgeable. And it's really, very important to have that person by your side because, again, attorneys are not writing contracts here in Florida. We are. Now, yes, the contract is a standard bar Florida Realtor Bar Association contract, but you have to know how to fill it in to represent your party the best. So, and then, somebody might say to me, well, why would you want to have a short inspection period? Because I like to have a short inspection period because if you don't like the property, let's move on to the next one. Don't hold up the seller. Let's move on. So I'm going to give you a few takeaways here. I like short inspection periods. I like strong earnest money deposits. And I want to make sure that I guide you through the entire process. Do not work with a realtor that is not holding your hand through the entire process. It's very, very important. I'm a very knowledgeable realtor, been doing this 21 years here in Florida. Yes, I am very connected in the industry. I have been a Florida director since 2006, a national director on the National Association of Realtors for 4 years. And I've been the Florida RRC president, the Residential Real Estate Council president. So I love what I do. I love educating people. And I'm very, very passionate about helping people know how to maneuver through the transaction. Really, really important. Because do you know whether to hire a title company or an attorney to close the transaction? Why would you pick one over the other? We don't have to have an attorney closing it. You just have to have a closing company. So it's very, very important to have that realtor that has the resource bag, the tools and the resources, to have the right inspector out there. There's a zillion inspectors out here, but you want to choose the right one, the one that's going to look at every piece of that property. You want to choose the right insurance company that's not going to charge you too much money. And you want to make sure that you put enough money down in the earnest money deposit. This is where some people lose the offer because they might have made a nice offer, but they don't put a strong earnest money deposit down, and the next guy does. You're going to lose it to the next guy because the seller wants to see how invested you are in the property, that you're not going to walk away.
What we haven't spoken about, you mentioned mortgages before, but South Florida today is incredibly competitive. It's an incredibly competitive market. And you've mentioned several times over this conversation how people can lose a bid on a house they really love and they really want because of the way they structure their offer. And, I've seen it. I've been part of it. One of the things that we do as your mortgage partner is we address the seller's needs. I'm working for my client who's the buyer, but what I'm really thinking about when I'm presenting an offer is how can I give the seller certainty that this transaction is going to happen and it's going to happen seamlessly. It's going to be flawless. And that's something that you and I share in our worldview. It's how can we deliver a seamless experience to the clients, but also if we're representing the buyer, what do we have to do so that the seller has the sense of comfort that they're dealing with professionals? Sometimes I call it assembling a dream team. And a dream team is a situation where, Bonnie Metviner is the realtor, and we have a great inspector all lined up, and we can tell the seller, when we're making the offer, we're serious. We already have the inspector lined up, so he'll inspect. If today's Wednesday, he can be there by Friday. We've already made that call, and we have the insurance. We're not guessing at what the insurance is. We know what the insurance bill is going to be, and we can deliver that to the seller. And from my perspective, we do the same thing. We often will tell the seller that 24 hours after we have an accepted offer, they'll have the first stage of the approval. They'll have the underwriting approval. Sometimes, depending on size of down payment, the nature of the purchase, it will be dependent on an appraisal. Sometimes it won't. But by eliminating that concern, we can move the deal so far faster and so far closer to you winning rather than the other guy winning.
So a lot of times the seller will ask, can you waive the financing contingency? Can you waive the appraisal contingency? And if we know that it's going to appraise out, or if a buyer is willing to pay a certain amount of money over appraisal, we could write that right into the contract. So a seller could feel more comfortable knowing that the buyer is not going to walk away if it doesn't appraise. Very, very important. So the more money a buyer puts down, the more confident a seller is going to feel that the buyer is not going to walk away. So the financing contingency becomes less relevant because they know that if a buyer is buying $1 million property and they're putting down $300,000, that means it only has to appraise for $700,000. They're okay with that because they know the buyer is not going to walk away. And this is a comfort zone of why a seller would take one buyer over another. The stronger the earnest money deposit, the shorter the inspection period, the shorter the closing period, the more likely a seller is to take that buyer. Now, a lot of times I will at an appointment when I'm showing property, if I speak to the listing agent, I'll say, what kind of closing period is the seller looking for? Because if I know that the seller is looking for 30 days or 45 days or 25 days, I'm going to put that right in my offer. Because if I put that right in the offer, I know the terms the seller is looking for. Now, where does that benefit my buyer? It makes my buyer stronger. My buyer is stronger because they're giving the seller what he's looking for. And that's a happy meeting of the minds. It's very, very important for a buyer to understand that I'm not looking out for the seller's best interest. I'm looking out for their best interest.
Mm-hmm. This has been such a pleasure, Bonnie. Thank you so much for taking the time. And
very welcome.
This has been the Mortgages Made Easy podcast, and it's such a privilege to have you on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I enjoyed it.